Hey, I'm Di McQueen, licensed clinical social worker, family and addiction expert. I'm here with Dr. Brian Jackson, my longtime cohort who specializes in the field of addiction. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction.
Di and I have worked with addicts, alcoholics, and their families for over 30 years combined. Our podcast and coaching programs focus on families who have a loved one suffering from addiction. Our experience has been that this disease affects families as much, if not more, than the addict or alcoholic.
Is your world spinning out of control? Are you codependent? Are you experiencing worry, loss of sleep, and difficulty concentrating? If so, you're in the right place. Brian and I have both personally lived it, learned it, and now we're going to teach you tools and techniques on how to get your life back that you thought was shattered by addiction.
Okay, let's dive in.
Brian and I are so excited to introduce to you our new sponsor, Lakeview Health. They are a wonderful residential treatment center. Whether it's the family member who is looking for a place or the addict or alcoholic themselves, this would be the place that we would refer them to. Brian, you have many years of experience with Lakeview.
Yeah, Lakeview Health is a center of excellent addiction treatment. They take an evidence-based approach, medical approach to treating this complex brain disease. They hold the Joint Commission's Golden Seal, and they were voted one of America's best treatment centers by Newsweek magazine. They deliver dual diagnosis, gender-responsive, and trauma-informed care at their gorgeous facility here in Jacksonville, Florida. But they do see people from all over the world do come here to Jacksonville to go to treatment at Lakeview. Their levels of care include medically supervised detox, which a lot of people do need. Then they stabilize them in a residential rehabilitation and partial hospitalization program. They have board-certified physicians, master-level therapists, and they work to address the unique needs of each patient. So in other words, it's not a cookie-cutter program. They help individuals build skills for long-term sobriety. So if you or someone you know needs treatment, please visit their site at lakeviewhealth.com. We also have a hyperlink on our website at familyandaddictionexperts.com where you can just click and get some information about Lakeview Health. And Di, I think you have a number for people to call if they would like to inquire about treatment.
I sure do. That number is 888-480-3799. That's 888-480-3799. Give them a call.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. This is Dr. Brian Jackson. And I just wanted to say hello to everybody. We're just kind of going through some topics that I think are very important. Our last podcast was on some of the post-acute withdrawal symptoms that people may experience in early recovery. And it's important for the person in recovery and also their families to be aware of some of those signs and symptoms. But to be more specific, I wanted to talk about the chances that somebody would relapse. And so it's important to see the warning signs of relapse and what a relapse is in addiction recovery. You know, a lot of people think that people just pick up a drink or a drug just out of the blue, but typically there's some things going on prior to that lead up to it. My experience is we like to do what's called an autopsy of the relapse when somebody does relapse. And we go back and take a look at what was going on in their lives that may have caused them to be stressed or, you know, in a position of vulnerability to where the idea of using a substance or taking a drink might make sense. So there's 3 stages, and the first stage is an emotional relapse. And so that relapse begins emotionally, meaning that the person isn't actively thinking about using drugs or alcohol during this stage, but instead their emotions and behaviors are worsening and can lead up to relapse later on. So I wanted to talk about, you know, certain signs to look for if a person is emotionally relapsing. So the number one stage is the emotional relapse, and that would include mood swings, isolation. We see that a lot, isolating from other people, poor sleep schedule, And that could mean getting little sleep or too much sleep. Also, unhealthy eating habits. Eating at late hours. Pizza and things that are not really um, consistent. So it's real consistent important to be consistent in having some healthy meals. Poor self-care. Um, where a person is not showering every day or shaving, or basically not taking care of their physical appearance, and not using coping mechanisms to manage like complex emotions. And it's real important that they go to meetings or reach out to somebody else. But one of the signs and symptoms in this emotional stage is not going to meetings. Um, and also maybe just going to meetings but not participating in the meetings. Um, Holding on to one's thoughts and feelings are uh, really important for the person in recovery to acknowledge that they've got some feelings and thoughts going on that are uncomfortable, but yet they're not sharing um, that with anybody. Um, Avoiding one's own problems is another one. And I don't know if problems is the correct word, but maybe challenges or responsibilities or things that in normal circumstances, with less stress would be very easy to take care of. Um, and then not engaging in sober fun. So if sobriety is not fun, it makes it difficult for the person to say, wow, is this really a better way of life? And you can meet a lot of people at meetings that have the same interests as you and they're sober. For example, if you like the outdoors, fishing, hunting, or you like going surfing or walking or running, believe me, in those rooms of recovery, there are so many people that have those same interests. And it's important to connect with those people and realize that without our drink or drug, life can be rewarding and fun. So it's important for the individual to ask themselves some questions to gain like some awareness through self-reflection to prevent getting stuck in this first stage of relapse. So one of the suggestions I always make to people is to journal. So journaling is an excellent place to start. Once they recognize the behavior of their emotional relapse, they can overcome it. So writing things down, getting it out of their head, looking at maybe what the fears or anxieties are, and ask yourself, is this true? Is it not true? Is it partially true? These thoughts that are creating maybe fear and anxiety. But it's essential to change behavior to make an effort to be more positive. And that happens by taking care of yourself and engaging in recovery activities to overcome this emotional relapse. Otherwise, a person may fall into the second stage of relapse, which number two is mental relapse. So if a person doesn't change their behavior during the first stage, they can fall into the stage of mental relapse. And during this stage, a person may be fighting with themselves over whether or not to use drugs or alcohol. So um, there's some euphoric recall. Um, they may even think about using it more often and feel the urge to escape. So common signs of mental relapse include experiencing cravings. Now, these cravings typically come in the form early on of psychological cravings as opposed to physical cravings, but the psychological cravings will manifest itself eventually in physical cravings for the substance. And so they begin maybe fantasizing about using. It's very common, and I see this a lot, is that a person has a consequence, and that consequence, could be something legal, family, employment, and after the consequence, there's a real determination to stay sober. And some of these things get resolved as you are in sobriety and not drinking. And so we have this built-in forgetter where we have a tendency to forget the consequences that have been a direct result of our using and think about um, the good times, quote unquote, good times, the euphoric recall, and totally dismiss or not even think about some of the consequences that resulted um, because of our using. Um, and then you begin bargaining with yourself, like maybe it'd be okay to use. And then the planning starts, planning a physical relapse. I think that most alcoholics and alcohol addicts have a delusion that they can return to using less. And I think we've explained in earlier podcasts, because this is a substance use disorder illness, that the alcoholic and addict metabolizes the medication that they're taking or abusing, or alcohol. And my experience is 90, 95%, 100% of the time, people who have this illness or condition, when we return to drinking, we kind of start the pot of boiling water. And when I say that, it means that you might be able to do it for a little while, but eventually you will always go back to the level that you were using at or more. So, that's when um, I see like glamorizing, drug or alcohol use, minimizing the consequences of using, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Everybody else is doing it. I can control this. Yeah, I was doing it too much and now I can do it less. And that thinking that they can have control over their use, when in fact, the illness has control over the person. And if you just open the door to it with some drinks, with some drugs, believe me, it will take over. So, at this stage, a person is at high risk for physical relapse. That euphoric recall where your brain is telling you, oh, it would be fun to drink a little, to drug a little. But engaging in relapse prevention techniques is an excellent way, to halt that process and bring yourself back to a healthy state in recovery. And again, recovery is not easy. You have to do some work. Putting down the drink is one thing, but the ability or drug, it, to keep it down requires some work and action on the part of the person who is trying to get into good recovery. So it's important to talk to a trusted peer. Um, I always like to say an accountability partner. So another person that's been in recovery for a period of time, you form a relationship with them, and you can tell them what's going on. And a lot of times it's things that they experienced early in recovery and they were able to get through it, and they can give you suggestions as to what they did. Um, Typically cravings, and it's not a cookie cutter for everybody, lasts about 30 minutes. So if you could wait for 30 minutes, and I think that the intensity of the thought of this craving psychologically and physically will subside. And it's so important that you take sobriety one day at a time. Now, we all have good days and we all have bad days. So it's important to recognize that this too shall pass. I think a lot of people fall into, oh my God, this feels terrible. This is horrible. And it's going to be like this forever. Well, no, it's not. But again, keeping your head down, doing what's suggested, you will start to get traction in recovery. And I guarantee you that your life will get exponentially better as you get through this process. You've got to remember that you were typically using alcohol and or drugs for a long period of time. And I think, we all like instant gratification and, for the thing to be resolved very quickly. But it does not take as long as it did for you to get in a position where you needed to do something about your addiction as it does to get into good recovery. So, some relaxation techniques can be good in just trying to calm yourself down. Remember, we're in the mental relapse stage, and so it's important that it's dealt with. So you've got opportunities at the emotional relapse level, you've got opportunities at the mental relapse potential level to make some changes to curtail the things that would lead you to the third and final stage, which is physical relapse. So, physical relapse is the third and final stage, and it involves a person actively using drugs or alcohol. So this is when it's critical to reach out for help and stop the cycle before the individual falls back into active addiction. Do people slip? Do people have a quote unquote relapse, or however you want to table it, in recovery? Yes. I mean, you don't have to, but sometimes it is part of recovery. And so relapsing does not mean that you have failed and it's important for families to remember that they haven't failed. It's just that the individual needs to, reevaluate their coping methods and behaviors and get off that elevator down as quickly as possible. So the warning signs of relapse, while each stage has its own uh, warning signs, it's important to know that in the physical stage, you know, there are signs and symptoms that can help you or notice a person who is struggling more clearly. And some of those common warning signs of relapse include, glamorizing past drug and alcohol use, like we talked about uh, earlier, a false sense of control over the issues. So they might say to their families, "Hey, you know, I can control this. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I assure you that it will get there at some point." Again, hanging around old people and places associated with past use, um, that is really pushing the envelope. There's some obligatory events that you have to go to where maybe alcohol is served, i.e., a wedding or christening or something like that. But it's so important to minimize um, exposure to people and places where uh, it was associated with your previous use, because the brain has a impulse side and it has an adult rational side. And in spite of the adult rational side saying, "Hey, I really don't want to drink," being exposed to people that are drinking in places where you used to drink, the impulse side of the brain will light up red. And at some point, it might cross over that line where the adult rational side doesn't even weigh in. And the next thing you know, you've picked up a drink. Um, for families and for the person in recovery, sudden changes in behavior need to be um, recognized. Um, Isolation is another one. Letting up your discipline of going to meetings, you start to not go to meetings, not engaging in sober fun, and doubting that the recovery process is going to work, or that it's going to work for you. Um, a lot of times, what I see is people feeling more stressed than normal, and a lot of that goes back to change in sleeping patterns, not eating correctly, um, being more stressed. Stressors are more pronounced. So, it's I always talk about move a muscle, change a thought. It's important to get up and get moving, because it's hard to have two thoughts at the same time if you're out, or at least have a breakthrough from the ruminating and um, being stuck in your head. And sometimes people may experience depression. So at that point, it's really important to reach out, because relapse is preventable if it's caught early. So anyone can help bring someone out of the darkness and back into the light of recovery. So many individuals feel ashamed when they relapse at any stage and therefore refuse to ask for help. But this is only worsening matters. So the best thing to do if you're thinking about using again is to reach out for help, uh, either to a sponsor or accountability partner, I say, a sober friend, mental health professionals, or a treatment team. This way you can get the help that you need. And relapse prevention can be implemented before your physical relapse. Relapse is definitely preventable, and you don't want to wait until the physical relapse occurs. So again, for the person that's in early recovery, for family members who are living with somebody who is now in early recovery, these signs and symptoms of warning signs of a relapse are important, I think, to know. So we know in phase one, the emotional relapse is something that I think becomes quite obvious to family members, but also the individual is starting to feel it and they're not talking about it. So So there is a solution. You can get off any one of these stages of 1, 2, and 3 with some of the suggestions that I have made. And there's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in understanding that recovery takes time. Again, not as much time as it took for you to drink and drug to get yourself in a place where it had gone out of control or to the point where it was really interfering with your life and your life was unmanageable. So if you can just hang on, tie a knot in the end of your rope and hang on and don't quit 5 minutes for the miracle before the miracle, I assure you that your life will get exponentially better. And how to do that is basically to trust the people that are trying to support you and letting go of the fact that you think that you can control this on your own or that you don't need support. We need support in recovery. We need people who have been where we've been, who understand where we've been, who are now in recovery and understand the benefits of recovery for them in every aspect of their lives. And they can make suggestions to you and basically kind of hold your hand as you walk through the difficult parts of early recovery. So that is all I have for today. I appreciate you listening. There is a family survival kit on our website, and those are articles that are free downloads in PDF form that you can access in terms of things about family, things about addiction, things about recovery. And that is at our website at www.familyandaddictionexperts.com. And you can always send us a question at info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. And myself or Di McQueen, my partner, we will get back to you. So we really appreciate you listening. Hopefully, this is helpful to you. And a lot of this is subtle stuff that may have been outside of our awareness prior to getting some education and experience with this illness. And, again, I always stress that, the person who's suffering is not a bad person trying to become a good person. We have an illness and we're trying to get well and stay well. And some of these insights, if you will, can help you form a strategy to maintain your sobriety and experience what it is like to be in recovery and have a fun, good, happy life without the unmanageability that alcohol and drugs brings to our lives and those people around us. So thank you again for listening. We will be back on shortly, and we really appreciate you listening. And if there's any questions you have for us, please don't hesitate to ask, and we will get back to you with an answer. If we don't know, we'll tell you we don't know, but we will find out and get back to you. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for joining our podcast, Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more important tools, techniques, and ways for you to focus on you instead of the alcoholic or addict in your world.
Until then, please go to our website, familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's familyandaddictionexperts.com. You'll also see links to our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please also, if you have any emails that you would like to send us, that's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. With any thoughts, feelings, questions that you may have for us, we would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.